In this demo, I'll be creating an S3 bucket using the console. S3 stands for Simple Storage Service, and it's been around for quite a while in AWS. Essentially, it serves as a centralized storage repository for objects or for files. Now, S3 buckets have a lot of functionality. There are a lot of settings that you can manipulate. We're going to take a look at those. So to get started here in the console, I'm going to type S3 in the search bar at the top, and I'll click S3 to launch that management console. One of the things you'll notice is that when you're working with S3 buckets in the console, in the upper right, instead of a specific region being shown, as a matter of fact, they're all grayed out, instead what you'll see is the word global. And that is because the name of the S3 bucket must be globally unique. It also means that when you're viewing S3 buckets, you're viewing all of them regardless of the region that they were deployed into, because you can't escape the fact that when you create an S3 bucket, you are still tying it to a region. So here I have an alphabetical listing of existing buckets with the region they were deployed into, the type of access to the bucket, such as public access, and the creation date and timestamp. And as is the case with all of the GUI consoles throughout AWS, I can filter the list for something specific. However, here I'm going to create a bucket, so I'll choose Create Bucket. It tells me the name needs to be unique. Well, that would be globally unique. Can't contain spaces, cannot contain uppercase letters. Okay, so I'm going to call this Projects-East. And for the region, I'm going to leave it in the region I'm currently working in, even though it's not shown in the upper right because I'm in S3. That would be US East, so US East 1. Now, this is a great option. You can copy the settings from an existing bucket if you want to basically inherit most of its configuration options and then perhaps tweak a few of them after the fact. That's not the case here, but nonetheless, very handy. Now, if you're in a larger environment where you have multiple AWS accounts, maybe for different business units or even different business partners, you might have objects or files in S3 buckets contributed from different AWS accounts. So you can determine the ownership of those objects when they are uploaded into S3. The default is ACLs disabled, which means that all S3 objects would be owned by this AWS account, the one I'm in right now creating this bucket. Or you could turn on ACLs to allow ownership from multiple AWS accounts. Of course, that means that ACLs, which stands for Access Control Lists, would control access to the bucket. Down below, the default setting, and this is a good one, is to block all public access to this bucket. I can always change these settings later, but I'm going with that for now. Bucket versioning is currently disabled. Now, if you need to track multiple versions of files as they get modified in the bucket, you can enable bucket versioning. I'm going to leave it on the default of being disabled. Of course, we can always add up to 50 tags to this object. Let's add one for fun. I'm going to click Add Tag. Let's say for Cost Center, I'm going to create a Cost Center tag. I'll put in a value of ABC123. We can enable server-side encryption, whether we want to use Amazon S3 managed keys or whether we've already worked with KMS Key Management Service, where we even then have the option of choosing from our KMS keys that are under our control. So depending on how sensitive the data is that will be in the bucket, and any laws or regulations or contractual obligations you are bound to might determine how you select the encryption settings. I'm just going to leave it in this case on Amazon S3 managed keys. Let's go down and do advanced settings. We have an object lock option, which is disabled by default, but we could choose to enable it. This is a worm setting, write once, read many. Of course, we would have to go down and turn that on. But in some cases, you might want to put content in a bucket and then have it set as being read-only. There's a note that says Object Lock works only if versioning is turned on. So by turning on Object Lock, you're also turning on versioning. But I'm going to leave that disabled, as was its default setting. Okay, let's click Create Bucket in the bottom right. Now, you always have to wonder, how many buckets do I need? For example, if we are deploying a new custom web application, let's say it's an internal line of business app, does it need a bucket? And it really depends on the nature of the web application. you can choose to host the files and the content for that web app in a bucket through controlled access, or you might use an S3 bucket to allow users access to it as a file repository over the internet, or even just between EC2 instances in a VPC in the AWS cloud. So there are many reasons that would lead you to the point that you need to create a new bucket. So we've now got our new bucket that's been created here on the list. We have quite a few buckets here, so why don't we just filter it? I'll just type in project. There it is, Projects East. And if I click to open up that bucket, there's nothing in it. We'll be uploading content into buckets and dealing with that content in other demos. But for now, what I'd like to do is go to the properties of the bucket. So we have the region it was deployed into, the Amazon resource name, or the ARN. That can be important if you're creating access policies. We have the creation date and timestamp. This is where we could turn on bucket versioning down the road, work with tags and encryption, and various logging and auditing configuration settings that are available, and some other stuff that we didn't see upon creation, like transfer acceleration to enhance the speed of data transfers. Up at the top, if I go under permissions, this is where we can change access to the bucket. Right now, it's set to block all public access, but of course, we could go down but we could click edit. We could turn that off if we so chose, and then select from the options down below. By not blocking all public access, what you would really be doing is allowing anonymous access. In some cases, that would make sense, but that's not what I'm going to do here, so I'll just click cancel. We could click metrics, because we know how important it is to monitor AWS service usage over time. Of course, this is a brand new bucket, so there's not a whole lot to look at here, but we'll cover monitoring later. If I click management, we have the ability of working with lifecycle rules. This is an automated way to take care of the objects in the S3 bucket over time, such as if they aren't accessed frequently, and then moving them into a different storage class or storage tier, perhaps even archiving them. And this is all automated, but we'll focus on lifecycle management in another demo later. And we can also go to access points to create one or more access points, even using different names, that would be used for connectivity to the S3 bucket, perhaps by an application component. All right, so at this point, we have successfully created our Projects-East S3 bucket.